Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning into this session, which is a brief overview of some of the more recent trends in interpreting, focusing more specifically on remote interpreting. If you've been in the interpreting game for a while, you will probably already be familiar with most of what we will see here. Use this as a point of comparison for your own experience, if that's the case. If you are new to interpreting or considering getting into interpreting, there may be data here that can help better inform some of the decisions you choose to make moving forward. Those who read last year's ProZ.com industry report for freelancers, or maybe you heard the audio version narrated by Paul Irwin on the ProZ.com podcast, may remember that we looked at two main trends that were affecting interpreters. The first one we'll talk about is something that has been building for some time now, an increasing overlap between translators and interpreters. Claudia Brauer, who we'll be hearing from today as well, coined the term transinterpreter to refer to these professionals who do both interpreting and translation. A long-held argument for sticking to one's lane has been that translation and interpreting require different skill sets. That's probably true, but they are not necessarily mutually exclusive. So plenty of translators and interpreters are discovering that adding the other service to their offering is both good business and fun. At the moment, between 30 and 40% of language professionals offer both services to some degree or another. At least as far as interpreters are concerned, this trend was accelerated by the pandemic, when suddenly traditional forms of interpreting disappeared for a while in most places. Many interpreters found themselves office-bound where they had not been before, and picking up a translation project here and there began to make more sense and allowed them to either steady or increase their income. However, there are still more translators moving into interpreting than there are interpreters moving into translation. One possible reason for this is that for those whose main service is translation, it is a bit easier to schedule and juggle translation projects and then jump online for some interpreting gigs in between. Whereas for the person whose main service is in interpreting, maintaining work volume can sometimes depend on being on and available, and you may have little or no warning at all when your next call will come along, making it a bit more difficult to work around deadlines for translation projects. The other trend, which was also greatly accelerated by the pandemic, is the growing use of remote interpreting. Pre-pandemic, much of the technology required to loop in an interpreter remotely was already pretty good and improving. When much of the world was on lockdown, this technology made it possible for many interpreters to continue to reach their clients, and it was pushed to improve and scale more rapidly than it would have on its own. If you were doing in-person interpreting up until then, you probably saw yourself forced to either work remotely or not work at all. Some kinds of interpreting suffered a moment of pause as adjustments were made. Think of all the in-person conferences which were canceled or postponed until those events could find their new online incarnations, for example. Medical interpreting, on the other hand, could not afford to pause and probably increased. Now, in 2023, some of the remoteness has been walked back, at least for the time being. We're seeing this in all industries to some extent or other, as people struggle to go back to the way things were before, while at the same time struggling to strike the right balance between that and incorporating some of the advantageous tech, procedures, and lifestyle that came out of lockdown. But don't let that fool you. It won't be back to business as usual ever again. Remote interpreting will continue to grow as both hardware and software improve to support it, and it has some clear advantages if we are thinking about the future. For one, it's safer. In some situations, for example, in conflict zones or some crisis or health related scenarios, adding an in person interpreter to the mix can be an additional security or health risk. It's also faster. Precious time can be saved by bringing in a remote interpreter rather than waiting for an interpreter to arrive on site if one happens to be near enough to make it feasible. This can be especially important in emergency situations, but also just convenient for the client. It has greater reach. This reach works from two ends. For the person with the need, if you need an interpreter, it is increasingly easier to get one right away, whereas in years past, you may have had to just do without, sometimes in situations where access to language was crucial. For the professional providing the service to meet the need, you are less and less bound by your location, and doors are now open to many new clients which may not have been reachable otherwise. If, for example, you provide interpreting services in African languages from Africa, you can now reach clients in the US or Europe or anywhere else with relative ease. And it's more cost effective. For the client, the decision of do I hire an interpreter for this can be made easier if some of the overhead costs normally associated with interpreting in person can be removed from the equation. In situations where not having an interpreter physically present does not jeopardize the quality of the outcome, it just makes good sense to bring them in remotely if you can. The way forward, though, is not without its challenges if you are a remote interpreter now or thinking of becoming one. Let's take a quick look at the current landscape for remote interpreters. First, there is a healthy distribution of professionals in terms of how many years they have been in the industry. My guess is that if we were to ask in a year or so, that initial group of new interpreters will have grown noticeably, however. Of the 66% of interpreters who offer interpreting through remote interpreting platforms, most are doing so via more than one platform. The most common reason behind this is the interpreter seeking to ensure a certain volume of work. And 78% of interpreters would do more interpreting work if it were channeled their way. Of those providing their services through more than one platform, around 30%, at least occasionally, set themselves as active or available on more than one platform at a time in order to ensure better incoming work volume. Similarly to the use of translation management systems for translation, platforms which facilitate and manage remote interpreting services are productivity boosters for both the client and the service provider. But similarly to what happens in translation, some of this efficiency is lost on the service provider's end when they are required to learn to be proficient and to be present in multiple platforms. If you ask an interpreter what concerns them most at the moment, you are likely to get a response that includes one or more of the following. The first one is getting more work or more clients. Downward pressure on rates comes in second, followed by advances in tech, which are changing the way the work is done, as well as keeping up professionally, maintaining the quality of the work, and then either having more time for oneself and family, or having more time for work. These concerns are common to translation work as well, and to freelancers in all industries in general. One concern which was mentioned frequently among interpreters, and which is unique to interpreters, was the impact of poor or variable sound quality in remote interpreting, especially in the context of remote simultaneous interpreting. This is an issue which is frequent enough that at least 5% mentioned it, and it's an issue which impacts not only the quality of the service one can provide, but also potentially the health of at least the provider of the service, so it's worth noting here. So, if we look back at that list of interpreter concerns, there is a good deal of interplay between concerns number 2, 3, and 4. Downward pressure on rates is not new, and it is not exclusive to interpreting, nor is it exclusive to the language services industry. The language professionals who are doing the best in confronting this challenge tend to be those who have specialized and who have also invested in that specialization in various ways, thereby being able to provide better quality services more efficiently. They differentiate themselves as specialists, which makes them more attractive to clients, easier to screen, and also allows them to demand better rates than a generalist can expect. And they are also staying on top of the tech advances, which are either changing the way we work or have the potential to change the way we work. Rather than rejecting all this technology outright, they put in the work to understand it. They leverage it in their favor, in their work, and some are going as far as to specialize in certain tools and trends because it helps them work more efficiently, and it also allows them to provide expert consultation to their clients on those tools and trends. Having done this, they are also tending to get more clients and more work, in general, earning more. And they can then focus more narrowly on resolving concerns of work life balance. Artificial intelligence, cue the menacing soundtrack here, has been a big subject of discussion in recent years. And that has seemed to have accelerated recently. So, sorry if you are tired of hearing about it at this point. But at least in the language services industry, we seem to have moved beyond the point where the discussion was about where and how AI would be implemented to concrete examples of it being used to provide better and faster services and results outside of the more narrow use of machine translation, that is. Interpreters are finding creative ways of leveraging AI and other advances in tech to their advantage. Some of these uses are in the preparation or training process. For example, a common use of ChatGPT and other AI chatbots is to generate texts, which can then be turned into speeches using text-to-voice software or functions for general practice, vocabulary acquisition, and preparation for a job. Sometimes you're as prepared as can be, but the client has not passed along all the relevant information, or the situation changes near to or during the job. Being mentally quick on your feet is part of being an interpreter, but interpreters are using new tools to make them even quicker to react and to adapt to the situation. Tools such as machine translation are useful for prep and can also be used in the moment to get out of tight spots. With automatic closed captioning and interpreting software, some have seen a decrease in some types of jobs as clients experiment with this. But just as often, you have a smart interpreter using those same solutions on their end to make their job easier and provide better results. Being knowledgeable and proficient in new technologies will help you perform better. It will also put you in a position where you can more professionally respond with ease when your clients are experimenting with the same technologies. For example, responding to a client who is following along an interpretation with an automated interpreting software and objects when the terms or turns of phrase being provided do not match. Very often, the language professional is more versed in the tool than the client, and being able to effectively share that knowledge can benefit all parties involved. There are all kinds of detailed advice and strategies you can follow to do more and better work, and you'll no doubt be getting all of that today from the lineup of coming sessions. In general, I'll limit myself for now to these four, which you probably already take as givens. It's long been known that specializing is the way to go. Specialists can do it better and faster, and they tend to earn more. So specialize. Stay on top of new advances in tech which are affecting or which may potentially affect your work. As I said before, language professionals are often more experienced in some of these new solutions by the time their clients start asking about them. And that is a powerful, helpful, and beneficial place to be. Incorporate what you can into your work and use it to your advantage. The days where the human language professional could simply speak out against new solutions and refuse to leverage them where they are useful, those days are gone. And invest in you and your business. This last one is a bit of a no-brainer, but it is also one which seems to be a difficult hurdle for many, especially those just starting out. But any business runner who refuses to invest in the business they are running is destined to close that business sooner or later. And if you are a freelancer, you are the business runner and the business. I'll leave you now with some thoughts shared by interpreters on remote interpreting. It's not all rosy. There is some work to be done and improvements that can and could be made, but it's also a really exciting time to be in the game. I'd like to say thanks to Paul and Helen on the ProZ.com team for putting this event together, and I'm looking forward to hearing any questions or comments on this presentation, and I'm looking forward even more to the coming sessions. Thanks, everyone.